Lesson 3, the judges to the kings. Want to take up where we left off the last time, following through the promised land and who has been on that land and what occurred with that land throughout history. And I'm trying to get us through it as quickly as we can and thoroughly cover the material that we have to cover. Because of what is going on in the Middle East right now, what's going on around the world, we need to know. And we started in the Bible naturally because we're believers and we believe in the Abrahamic covenant. So that's where we started with this particular study as the land that was promised to Abraham. So with that said, I'm going to go to Judges 1, verse 21. I want you to listen to what this, because I'm going to skip various places. At the same time, the Benjaminites did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. The Jebusites have lived among the Benjaminites in Jerusalem to this day. Slip down to 27th verse. At that time, Manasseh failed to take possession. Down to 29th verse. At that time, Ephraim failed to drive out the Canaanites who were living in Gezer. So the Canaanites are still living there, basically, is what it said. Then in the 30th verse, Zebulun failed. Asher failed. Naphtali did not drive out the residents of Beth-shemesh or the residents of Beth-anath. Down to the 34th verse, the Amorites forced the Danites, Dan is one of the tribes of Israel, Danites into the hill country, did not allow them to go down into the valley. Judges 2:1. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land I had promised to your fathers. I also said, I will never break my covenant with you. You are not to make a covenant with the people who are living in this land, and you are to tear down their altars. But you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I now say, I will not drive out these people before you. So he had given them a commandment, and for a reason, and it answers a question I have coming up in just a minute. But I want to look at the maps to review from last week. This is the territory, basically, roughly, and there are different ones show slight variations, that was promised to Abraham. Starting over here, the brook of Egypt, all the way up to the Euphrates River, out to the Mediterranean Sea, and out here back past the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, this line. And what they settled when they came over here was this much land because of just what we read in the Scripture, that they didn't obey the Lord and do what He told them to about driving the people out, so they never took possession. So the question I'm going to have coming up here, why did Israel never receive the full promise in relation to land that was promised to Abraham in the covenant? Why wasn't it fulfilled? Because God didn't break His part of it. He made the promise. That's something that we can take for ourselves so far as that goes. God promises certain things and tells us certain things and gives us certain commandments and so on. And when we don't possess what God would have us possess, it's not God's fault. It's our fault. And I put the question, was God incapable of keeping His end of the bargain? No, He was not incapable. He was totally capable and totally willing. And He would have been with His people the whole time and gone before them, as He stated many times in the Old Testament, and would have fought the battles for them. How hard did they have to fight to conquer Jericho? They didn't have to fight hard at all, because God was, if God's on your side, if God's for us, who can be against us? So it's going to take us where we are starting tonight. And I put two maps up here. This one that gives you a rough idea. This is the time of the judges, and the reason I use this one is because it gives the name of each one of the judges and shows which tribe they were from. And through the different period of time, through the period of time we call the judges that's in the book of Judges, about a 400 some year period of time when they were under judges after they had come into the promised land, and the people be having the children of Israel would be having a tough time, and people were about to conquer them, and they would repent, and God would send a judge to deliver them. And and they were humans, and they fallible, just like Samson. Would you think of him as being a hero of Israel? But he was one of the judges that helped deliver them from the Philistines. So anyway, this is the way it looked. And over here, by the time you get to King Saul, who is the first king of Israel, this is roughly what the map looked like. Now, these maps, if you look them up, you'll find them, they vary slightly, and the reason being is because this was thousands of years ago. So you have to go on the writings the best we can tell about what's there. And you can see the Philistia had spread back out some. The Canaanites were here, the Moabites here. This area here was all there was of Israel. The Phoenicians were up here. It had shrunk some since the time that the children of Israel had come into the promised land and conquered the land, because they were losing ground. And they came to Samuel and said, look, we want a king, because all the rest of the nations have a king. And he said, well, they've turned against me. And God said, they're not against you, they're against me. He said, so give them a king. He said, I'll pick out one for them. And so he picked out Saul, who was a head taller than everybody else. He looked like a king. He's the one that they picked. Well, under him, there was some success, and then there wasn't. Things turned sour after a while, and it didn't go well. So I want to follow through the period of the kings, what this area of the world looked like, what we call, what it is now, the nation of Israel in here, what it looked like and who inhabited the land during this particular time, and how things changed, because it changed multiple times, which we won't be able to cover them all, but you'll be able to get some idea. 1 Samuel 2:21. Eli's sons were wicked men. They had no regard for the Lord. So who is Eli, and what does he have to do with it? His sons were, it was Hophni and Phinehas, if I remember correctly, were his two sons, and they were not nice fellows. 1 Samuel 1:9 will help us understand who Eli is. Hannah got up after they ate and drank at Shiloh. Eli the priest. So who was Eli? He was a priest. Where? Shiloh. Went to Shiloh. Was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's tabernacle. Deeply hurt, Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept with many tears. Making a vow, she pleaded, Lord of hosts, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut. And then we slip down to the 15th verse, and I'll fill in between, so we won't have to put it all in there. Eli saw her there, and it said her mouth was moving, but she wasn't saying anything. He thought she was drunk, and he told her basically, you need to get off the bottle, is what we would say. But she said, I'm not drunk, and this is what she said. She said, no, my Lord. Hannah replied, I am a woman with a broken heart. I haven't had any wine or beer. I've been pouring out my heart before the Lord. Don't think of me as a wicked woman. I've been praying from the depths of my anguish and resentment. Eli responded, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant the petition you've requested of him. So Hannah had come there. Elkanah was her husband. He had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, and it said he loved Hannah more, but she didn't have any children. She hadn't given him any sons, and Peninnah had, and Peninnah did not treat Hannah very well. And so Hannah, when they went up to make the offering at Shiloh, like they did every year, she went before God at where the Ark of the Covenant was, where the tabernacle was. She went there to pray, and that's what occurred. And he responds to her, because he was the priest at this time. Now, 1 Samuel 1:24. When she had weaned him, she took him, that's talking about Samuel, took him with her to Shiloh, as well as a 3-year-old bull, half a bushel of flour, and a jar of wine. Though the boy was still young, she took him to the Lord's house at Shiloh. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. Please, my Lord, she said, as sure as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. The first thing, can you imagine, any of you women in here, if you had a child, first child you'd had, and you had not have been able to have any children, and you had a child, and you just weaned this child. Weaning a child at this particular time would have been anywhere from 2 to 3 years old, somewhere around that particular time. So it had been a very young child, and you're taking this child and giving this child to somebody else to raise. That would be a tough thing to do. But what did she do? She made a covenant with God. She promised God this, and because she promised God this, she did what she said she was going to do, and she would bless. She wound up having 5 or 6 more, I think it's 5 more children. I prayed for this boy, and since the Lord gave me what I asked him for, I now give the boy to the Lord. For as long as he lives, he is given to the Lord. So he's committed to God from the time he was born, and she turned him over to him. Now, I don't, considering his 2 sons were duds, I don't know why you turn your son, but she had promised this boy to the Lord. He was dedicated to God. So, where is Shiloh, and what is significant about it in the scripture concerning Eli, Hannah, and Samuel? So, where is Shiloh? I think I have a map up here in a minute, but where I can show you where it is. But let me skip down to this. 1 Samuel 3:19. Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him. He fulfilled everything Samuel prophesied. All Israel and Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a confirmed prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear in Shiloh because there he revealed himself to Samuel by his word. It's still talking about Shiloh. Now let me fill in the space in between. What occurred was the children of Israel went to war. And they were losing. They said, the reason we're losing is because we didn't bring the Ark of the Covenant with us. Well, the Ark of the Covenant was in Shiloh. Is where it was at this time. So they went and got it and took it out. And Phinehas and Hophni, who was Eli's sons, went with them. And both of them were killed. And the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines and taken to their before their God and put in their temple. Things didn't work out well for them, but that's what happened. And when that happened and Eli heard it, Eli could not see at that time. He fell off of the stool he was sitting on, broke his neck, and he died. So his sons died, he died, and one of them's wife, I think, miscarried, if I remember correctly. I have to go back and look up that to be sure. But anyway, it was a bad time all around. And Samuel was the one that became the prophet before the Lord and the one that prayed before God, basically the high priest, if you will. And if we'll back up on the story of that for just a minute. Here was Samuel as a boy in the house with Eli. And he heard somebody speak to him. He went to Eli and said, you called me? He said, I didn't call you. He said, go back to bed. He went back to bed. And if somebody called him and he went back and said, you called me? He said, I didn't call you. And I think it was the 3rd time he went back and Eli, it dawned on me, he said, that's God speaking to you. He said, next time, he said, here I am, Lord, or whichever translation you read. And he did, and he gave him a prophecy. And the prophecy had to do with Eli and his sons and what would happen to Israel and the Ark of the Covenant and so on. And he didn't want to tell Eli, but Eli made him and he told him. But so anyway, what has happened is we've gone from Eli and his generation to here, and they're still in Shiloh. Here is where Shiloh is. Here's the Dead Sea. Here's the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River. Shiloh is up here. And I've got an insert here that shows the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies and the Most Holy Place is back here with the Ark of the Covenant in it. And it was in Shiloh because when they came across the Jordan River, that's where they set up the tent, the tabernacle was in Shiloh. And I did these two maps so you can see back then. See, here's Shiloh, here's Jerusalem, it wasn't Jerusalem at that time. But you can see they're not very far apart, because Jerusalem is where the Ark of the Covenant wound up. That's where the first temple was built by Solomon, and then the second temple, and then the third temple. So, or actually, well, we'll say third temple for now. I did this one so you can see how it is today. This is the West Bank. This is Israel here. And this is what some of them call the occupied territory, where they say they want to make a Palestinian nation. And we won't discuss that now, but anyway, there's Shiloh. And you can see the location where it is. So if Shiloh still existed, Shiloh doesn't exist as a city or a town anymore, but this is where they think it was. It would be in the what they call the occupied territory, north of Jerusalem, which is here, which is on the border, half of it in the Jewish side and half of it in the Islamic side. That's where Shiloh is. So, got a quote here by Yossi Ives from, he's a rabbi from Pomona, New York. Prior to the temples in Jerusalem, a temple stood in Shiloh, an ancient town in Samaria, for a full 369 years. So it was there for a long time. While Shiloh's fortunes varied over this time, it was the only place that served as a national religious center for the Jewish people during this period, the era of the biblical judges. During the time of the judges, when you're reading in the book of Judges, this is where the Ark of the Covenant was. This is where the tabernacle was. It was not in Jerusalem. It was here. This is the site where they think that Jericho was. They think is some of the ruins of Jericho. So you can see it doesn't exist today. Rabbi Ives again. Eli, the high priest, served with distinction in Shiloh as a spiritual leader for Israel. People traveled significant distances to make their pilgrimage to Shiloh, which is how we famously encounter Elkanah. And you notice how this is Hannah, is who this is. He's Jewish, so he would spell it like this. Hannah's heartfelt prayer for offspring at the temple in Shiloh is one of the most famous ever uttered. The son she was finally blessed with, who grew up to become the great prophet Samuel, was brought to Shiloh as a child and raised there by Eli. So we could see during this particular time, this area was still inhabited by the Jewish people, and it was just their center of worship was still Shiloh, which it had been for almost 400 years. It had been in that particular place. Joshua 18:1, back up a little, says, the entire Israelite community assembled at Shiloh, where it set up a tent of meeting there. The land had been subdued by them. And I put a note there that if you read back in the Bible when the tabernacle and the enclosure for the tabernacle, all this area, when this was made, it was made of the surrounding area around it was made, and even the tabernacle itself, the Holy of Holies, the most holy place, it was made out of wood and fabric. And so they could take it apart. It fit together, and it goes in detail on how it fit together. So when they would move, because they were moving for 40 years, they wandered in the wilderness, and while they were moving, they could take it up. And one group of people had all the wood, and the other one carried the fabric, and it was an involved process of moving it. Well, when they came to Shiloh, it was there for almost 400 years, so it's believed that they built a stone wall around here instead of the fabric that we see. I'm only telling you that because it gives you a little bit of a picture of what we have here. This was a permanent thing. This was not a temporary temple at that time. How many of you know of a house anywhere around here that's 400 years old? Well, this thing lasted 400 years where it was, and so it gave them plenty of time to build a stone wall around it, and still had the Ark of the Covenant. within that. If you remember, this is when the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines, they started being plagued, the Philistines started being plagued by, some people say, tumors. If you read it in the King James, the indication is it was hemorrhoids that they were plagued with, and with rats. And the Philistines were saying, we are cursed because of this Ark of the Covenant. We shouldn't have this thing. We got to get rid of it. So they put it on a cart and hooked it to some oxen and headed them in the right direction. But they made gold images of the tumors and of the mice to put on there as an offering along with the Ark of the Covenant, and sent it back to Israel. And it came back into Israel at that time. So that's just kind of filling in a blank space there. So bring us up in history that the Ark of the Covenant did wind up back in the possession of the children of Israel at that particular time. Now, why is Jerusalem so important to the Jews and Muslims today? They're fighting over this one little city. This one little city has caused a lot of grief. Both of them say it belongs to them. Now, I'm going to let you decide for yourself, but pay attention to what we have here. We'll go with Scripture first. And this is around 1000 B.C. That was a long time ago. 1000 B.C. 2 Samuel, that's a rough time. 2 Samuel 5:6. The king and his men marched, and this is King David, marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites who inhabited the land. The Jebusites had said to David, "You will never get in here. Even the blind and lame can repel you," thinking David can't get in here. Yet David did capture the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. So he captured Jerusalem and made it into his capital city, if you will. And it was called the city of David. That was in 1000 B.C. Zion means it's a mountain. In Jerusalem, it means something else like prairie or something like it. But anyway, there's two, if you look this up, there's two hills close together, and one of them is Mount Zion, like we're called Mount Zion. It's Mount Zion, and that's where Jerusalem is. 2 Samuel 6:12. It was reported to King David, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's family and all that belongs to him because of the Ark of God." So David went and had the Ark of God brought up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David with rejoicing. Now, how did it get to Obed-Edom's house? When David made the city of Jerusalem into his capital city, he was the king, and he wanted the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. So he sent them to get it, and they loaded it on a cart. And they were hauling it back, and before it got there, it hit a bump, and Uzziah reaches up to stop it from falling off, and it knocks him dead. You say, God's kind of cruel. But it killed him. So David said, maybe I don't want that thing in my backyard. So it winds up at Obed-Edom's house is where it winds up. But they got to noticing that he and his family were getting blessed and all kind of wonderful things happening to him. He said, I think it's time to go get the ark and bring it to Jerusalem. And that's what they're talking about here. They brought it to Jerusalem. So what time frame we're talking about? What year? About 1000 BC. That's before Christ. If you look secular, it's BCE, before the Common Era, but we say before Christ. It was 1000 BC. Keep that in mind. For Muslims, either one's correct, Jerusalem was, what's the name of the religion? Islam. Islam is the name of the religion. Muslim means they practice the religion of Islam. Basically is what it means. For Muslims, Jerusalem was the first place toward which they turned to pray in prayer. So that's the first place that Muhammad told them to face Jerusalem when they prayed. But, as you read on here, it was many years into the Islamic mission that Muhammad was instructed to change it from Jerusalem to Mecca. In Quran 2, 142 through 144, if you want to look it up in your copy of the Quran, you can look it up and make sure I'm telling you the truth. It is reported that the prophet said, and this is a quote, "There are only 3 mosques to which you should embark on a journey. The sacred mosque Mecca, Saudi Arabia, this mosque of mine, Medina, Saudi Arabia, and the mosque of Al-Aqsa, which is in Jerusalem." So to the Muslims, the third most holy site in their religion is Jerusalem, is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on what we call the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So here they're tied with their religion to this Temple Mount, which the Jews are tied to because it's a Temple Mount. That's where Solomon's temple was, where Herod's temple was, the temple of Zerubbabel. All the temples, any temples that were there that were temples to Jehovah, as the way we would say it, Yahweh, or whichever way you want to go with that. Both religions consider this one of their holiest sites, if not their holiest site. To a Jew, the Jerusalem is the most holy of the sites because that's where the temples were, so far as we can tell. And this is a quote. "And one evening, legend tells us that the angel Gabriel miraculously took the prophet from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the furthest mosque, Al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem. He was then taken up to the heavens to be shown the signs of God. After the prophet met with the previous prophets and led them in prayer." Did you get that? He met with all the previous prophets, which would be Adam, which would be Noah, which would be Jesus. They consider him a prophet. All of them, he led them all in prayer, which was nice of him while he was there. He was then taken back to Mecca. And so that's the reason they think it's such a holy site. Okay, let's compare something. David conquered Jerusalem and made this his capital and brought the Ark of the Covenant there in what year? 1000 BC. Muhammad lived in circa, which means about 570 to 8 June 632. So we're talking about 1600 years later when it became a holy site for Muslims. Now, that doesn't have to mean anything in and of itself, but just keep that in mind. I've got a couple of pictures here. Both of these are artist renderings of what they think, the one artist thinks, another artist thinks, that Solomon's temple looked like when it was built. Because you remember David wanted to build a temple. God told him you gather all the stuff together, the gold and everything you need, and your son's going to build it. And Solomon built the temple and dedicated the temple there in Jerusalem. And then inside there, the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was placed at that time. Okay? At that same spot, the best we can tell, because that was destroyed in 70 A.D. Not that. Herod's temple, the last temple that stood there, was the one that was destroyed in 70 A.D. This one was destroyed before then. We'll get into that in just a minute. On the Temple Mount today is the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, which are the most holy sites, some of the most holy sites for the Islamic people. You can go, I mentioned this last time, I'm quite sure, but you can go up there at different times and walk around on the Temple Mount, but you cannot pray on that. A Jew or a Christian cannot pray on top of that site. You can't go in the mosques there. You can't have anything because you're not a Muslim. You can't. The Jews that are living right there cannot come up there and pray on that site. Anytime they've tried to, they've had riots to break out and so on. So you have two different religions, two separate religions that are claiming the same site as a holy site. Can you see why there's a problem? And it's been a problem for thousands of years. The Al-Aqsa is where the prophet led the other prophets in prayer during the night journey and ascent. The Dome of the Rock is the place where he was when he ascended up into heaven. So they their belief is that here is where he ascended up into heaven. This is where he led the prophets in prayer. So this is their most holy sites. Like I said, the third most holy site. Because both of these are both on the Temple Mount. So, let's get back to our maps again. This is roughly what the kingdom of Israel looked like under King Solomon. And you can see it expanded under King David from the time of Solomon. It expanded under him and expanded under Solomon. And he had a time of peace in Israel up to the Euphrates River, down to the brook of Egypt, and over into here past where they had settled it initially. So the kingdom grew and had grown to this size. Then we have this map. And we have Israel and we have Judah. So what happened? Solomon died and his son Rehoboam became king. And I'll just tell you the quick story so we won't have to read it all. Rehoboam wants some advice on what to do. So he goes and asks some of the elders, some of the older men, what should we do? He said, what you need to do is let up a little bit, ease up on the people, give them a little bit of a break, and they'll follow you, and everything will be good. And so he goes to his young buddies that are around there. That's not the way the Bible says it, but he goes and he gets some of the young men to give us some advice, and they say, look, you tell them if you thought my dad Solomon was tough on you, I'm going to be even tougher. And when he did, Jeroboam led the people from the northern part of the kingdom out of Israel, from having one nation, and it split in two, and you wound up with the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. And over here you see Philistia again, and Gaza, sound familiar? Ascalon, Ashdod, Jaffa, and all of these are over in what is Philistia. What don't you see there? You don't see a nation of Palestine. We're still going through history, and you still haven't found a place or a nation called Palestine. I'm not trying to be ugly. We're following history. We're following the history of the area here. So it was split into two different areas, two different kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and they had a series of kings through each one of them. 2 Kings 17:1. In the 12th year of Judah's king Ahaz, Hoshea, son of Elah, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 9 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. Is that a good idea? No. But not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. So he's at least better than some of the ones before him, is what it's saying. Go down to 6th verse. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He deported the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Halah and by the Habor, Gozan's river, and in the cities of the Medes. And that was about 722 B.C. That's about 700 years. He took them into captivity, left a lot of the places desolate because the Assyrian Empire was the one that was in ascendancy at this particular time, and they conquered them, but they didn't conquer Judah. 2 Kings 25:8, the fill in between that it doesn't tell you in the Bible, the Babylonians wound up conquering the Assyrians and taking over their territory. So, 2 Kings 25:8, on the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guards, a servant of the king of Babylon, entered Jerusalem. He burned the Lord's temple, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down all the great houses, and this was about 586 B.C. So the Babylonian Empire is who conquered Judah, the southern empire. In fact, he came in there several years earlier, and he set up... he conquered them, and he set up a vassal king, if you will, set up a king there, and this king rebelled against him, and when he did, Nebuchadnezzar said, this is actually Nebuchadnezzar the second. His grandfather was Nebuchadnezzar the first, but Nebuchadnezzar the second, he said, well, I'll take care of that. So he goes down there, and he lays waste to the whole place and hauls them all to Babylon. Who was somebody that you have in the Bible that you read about, that there's a book in the Bible that it has to do with him, that was part of the captives that went into Babylon? Daniel. The book of Daniel. So Daniel went up as one of the captives. So, this is where we're going to wind down for tonight. You see where we came from the time of the judges through the kings, and the borders of the nation of Israel changed back and forth through the years after King Solomon, because there was many years from then until, because the period of the kings was about between 400 and 500 years as well. So that lasted, what I've just read in Scripture took a lot longer than what it took me to tell you about it and read about it. So during that time, the children of Israel, in one form or another, were in this land, and then the land became pretty much deserted. He left some people there to help to farm some and take care of the stuff around it, but the children of Israel were taken, a lot of them were taken out of this land and taken into captivity. So, any questions or comments?